is My name is Margaret Bullitt-Jonas, and I serve the Diocese of Western Massachusetts as Missioner for Creation Care, and also the Diocese of Massachusetts as Creation Care Advisor. In a moment, I will pass the baton to Lisa Hildebrandt, who is co-convener of the Creation Care Justice Network in the Diocese of Massachusetts, and also visioner for a church community that combines spiritual practice with climate justice. As you know, the purpose of these webinars is to build community and to expand our spiritual and physical capacity to respond to the climate crisis. The webinars are following on with the climate emergency declaration that was issued in late March by the bishops of our two dioceses here in Massachusetts. And we hope that these conversations will spark your ideas and your motivation as we respond to what liberation theologians call the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And we have gathered tonight to respond to that cry. As we get started, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. As residents of Massachusetts, we occupy the land of the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Nauset, Pocumtuck, and Mohican indigenous tribes. If you want to know whose land you are on, go to native-land.ca, and I hope someone will put that in the chat. We are grateful for the presenters who tonight will be sharing their knowledge, experience, and faith. And we recognize as well that there are no experts here. We are living through unprecedented challenges. Yet each one of us has gifts and experience and faith to bring to the table, and we will have an opportunity tonight to meet briefly in small groups as we build relationships and consider together how we can help to bring forth a more just and sustainable world. So let's open with a prayer and a brief overview of the plan for tonight's webinar, which is on the topic of advocate. Beautifully timed as we look ahead to a protest being organized against Line 3 in northern Minnesota. Over to Reverend Lisa Hildebrandt.
Thank you. So I'm going to read a prayer from Janet Morley called On the Burden of Love. Let us pray. O God, you took upon you the yoke of humanity and the burden of love, and did not find it easy. Let us learn from you to share the weight of all this aching world, that our souls may be light and our hearts rested, as together we are carried by you in Jesus Christ. Amen. So tonight, we are looking at advocacy. And advocacy means showing public support around a particular issue or concern. Probably all of you have done advocacy in some forms. One of the most common ways is to vote, is to make sure that the people you are voting for are supporting policies that you think are going to do the most good for common people. There are other ways you may be engaged in advocacy, signing petitions in person or online, emailing your elected officials, writing letters to the editor. And then there are some that require even more energy and courage, such as speaking face-to-face with public officials, going to protests, speaking out at public hearings, engaging in nonviolent direct action, and risking arrest. As people of faith, we are invited into this work on behalf of ourselves, on behalf of the most vulnerable, and on behalf of future generations. We are invited to use the tools of faith as we do so. That means finding our prophetic and moral voice, understanding what it is that God would have us do, and expressing that in the public sphere. It means building community and solidarity with other groups and grounding our work in prayer. I'd say one of the most powerful things we can do is engage in public worship and prayer in the face of injustice, whether that's at Line 3 in Minnesota or outside banks that are funding fossil fuel infrastructure, or at the compressor station in South Weymouth, all of these. And our other strong witness is to put our bodies in the way as protest. Now, as people in the Episcopal Church, I know some of you aren't from the Episcopal Church, but for people in the Episcopal Church, we are for the most part white, educated, and fairly well off. People on the front lines of the climate disaster are mostly Black, Indigenous, poor, and people of color. And many in their communities are on the front lines of fighting injustice and creating a more sustainable and equitable society. So in our climate advocacy work, it's important to pay attention and follow the lead of these activists. It's also important for us to use our privilege in ways that are powerful and make sense. For instance, risking arrest is something that we should maybe consider doing because we, as white people, are less likely to be brutalized by the police than our Black and brown siblings. Advocacy is about stepping up to the plate and working for systemic changes that will really move the dial. And because we are in a climate emergency, we hope that you will feel called to move to new ways of engaging, creating community, praying, and acting. Our 4 speakers tonight will share their own stories of advocacy with you, and then there will be time for you to discuss where you are and what tonight's presentations might spark in you. So our first speaker is Sue Swanson. She is a member of the Creation Care Justice Network in the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. She is a wonderful person, a mother, a grandmother, and a retired librarian. She says that unlike many who will speak this evening, she only recently became a climate advocate when she joined Mothers Out Front. There she participates at the local level, but spends a lot of her energy with their state legislative team. She admits that she is still amazed at the direction her life has taken. So I'm now very pleased to turn it over to Sue Swanson.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening and welcome to you all. Unlike the awe-inspiring speakers we will be hearing from this evening, as Lisa said, I don't have a long personal history or a family heritage of public advocacy. I actually became an advocate when years ago, there was literally no room at the food pantry for another volunteer. When, as a young mother, with a little time on my hands, I asked about volunteering at a local food pantry, I was told they had all their slots filled and I should call back later. I don't remember now how I became aware of Bread for the World's federal lobbying effort, but that is what I decided to do. Not only did Bread have room for me, I saw their work as a complement to the direct action of the local pantry. The bills Bread supported were and still are bipartisan, and they addressed the causes as much as the crisis of hunger and poverty. Fast forward 30 years, and once again, I had some time on my hands. My husband and I were newly arrived in Bedford, and I was looking for both connection and a cause. Climate was one issue of interest, but not necessarily at the top of my list. So I prayed, literally asking God to guide me as I browsed the stalls of our town day. When the women at the Mothers Out Front booth welcomed me, I entered a metaphorical door into a whole new level of advocacy. My experience with Bread had made me appreciate the power of public advocacy to effect change at the federal level. And here was an opportunity to do so at the state and local levels with others in a more visible and personal way. I have mostly focused, as Lisa said, on state legislation, originally focusing on gas leak legislation. We worked with allies across the state, and we were able to raise the legislature's awareness of this issue to such an extent that parts of our bill were actually included in the omnibus energy bill that session. I was hooked. So over the last 5 years, I have slowly gained more experience and more confidence. I have developed good relationships with several state legislators, and I have even given oral testimony at committee hearings. This was not what I envisioned for myself as a retired grandmother and librarian. But, I am thoroughly convinced that I am doing what God called me to do. And I am confident that He will continue to put words into my mouth, if and when needed, in one way or another. So tonight, I ask you to listen to God's call for you as you hear from our next 3 amazing advocates for climate justice. How are you being called to contribute your own unique gifts to the task before us? And what can you do in response to the climate emergency? As we heard last week, Lucy Chatfield comes from a family of activists. Today, we get to hear how she is one in her own right. Lucy is a native of Lincoln, Massachusetts, and a student at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., where she is pursuing a degree in environmental biology. Lucy helped establish a hub of the Sunrise movement at Georgetown. And as a leader in Sunrise, she fully understands the power of advocacy to influence public policy, and she clearly recognizes the connection between climate justice and social justice. Lucy and her fellow activists speak powerfully to the truth of the climate emergency and the need for bold action from all of us. Now, please welcome Lucy Chatfield.
Okay, now can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah, my name is Lucy. You guys, if you were on the call last week, you heard from my dad. And yeah, I'm a college student. I am 20 years old. I just finished my junior year at Georgetown. And I study environmental biology, and so sort of have an academic focus on climate and on the environment. But since I've been in college, I also have been doing a lot of climate and environmental advocacy. And in fact, like outside of class, that's pretty much all I do. So tonight I thought I would share with you all a bit about how I took the steps from being someone that had always, and especially in high school, been really interested in environmentalism and really concerned about climate change, particularly as a young person. And how I took the steps from taking that concern and really doing something about it and becoming an advocate in my own right. And then I'll hopefully have time to share a little bit about the organization I've been most involved with, which is Sunrise Movement. So that's where I'm going. So for me, the story really starts in the fall of 2018, which a lot of things happened in the world, but in my life, particularly, that's when I started college. So I first moved away from home and, met a ton of new people, started doing college classes and all of that. So it was a really big couple of months for me. And in the world, there was a lot going on as well. One really crazy, important thing that happened in that fall that had a bit impact on me was that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as a part of the UN, came out with a new report about climate change and about the state of climate change. And it was quite honestly terrifying to read and to hear about. They laid out essentially that the whole world needed to take incredibly bold and fast action on climate change in the next 12 years if we were going to have any real hope at preventing the worst of climate change. And I remember sitting in class, like on my phone, checking the news and seeing the results of this report come out and looking about it, and we talked about it in some of my classes, and just feeling so terrified that there was like this deadline of 2030, and thinking like, I don't know where I'm going to be. Like, I want to be having kids at 30, not like having having to deal with the worst of a climate disaster. And I also knew that like my government wasn't doing anything about climate change, at least nothing substantial, and in a lot of ways was making things worse, which was a really hard thing to grapple with. And also in the fall of 2018, there was the 2018 midterm elections, which was actually the first elections that I got to vote in as an 18-year-old. And I go to Georgetown. Everybody is very interested in politics, and so the midterm elections were a really big deal on campus. And I remember sitting in a big empty classroom with a bunch of people and with my friends, watching the election results come in, and starting to feel really hopeful, because it looks like the Democrats were going to take back the House and hopefully have some governing power to be able to do something even during the Trump presidency. And so I was feeling so many things. I was feeling terrified about climate change, but slightly hopeful. But I also knew that with just the House in Congress, and wasn't everything, and that in the past Democrats have not exactly acted boldly on climate in the way that maybe they should have. So I was feeling all of these things, and I was very happy to find out soon after that I was not alone in those feelings. A couple of days after the midterms elections, I got an email from this organization, Sunrise Movement, that I had sort of known a little bit about. I knew it was a movement of young people, a small organization focused on climate change at the federal level. And I had heard a little bit about them, and clearly they'd gotten my email somehow. And the email told me about how all these young people were going to be coming to DC the next week to hold newly elected leaders accountable and demand that bold action on climate change be a top priority for the new Congress, and especially for the Democrats in the House. And I remember being so excited. And then I looked at the date and I realized that I couldn't go to this action because I had a biology exam that I couldn't miss. So I was like, okay, whatever, I'll catch the next action. Little did I know that action would be a huge jumping off point for Sunrise Movement in particular, but also for the movement for a Green New Deal that would become huge in the next couple of years. So I don't know if any of you remember, but that was the action where about 100 young people sat in at Nancy Pelosi's office, and newly elected Representative-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joined those activists and those young people in Nancy Pelosi's office at that sit-in, and helped to get a lot of national news attention. It was a really big deal of people pressuring and putting the heat on a top Democrat, on Nancy Pelosi. And I remember having finished my bio exam, sort of watching the videos and the photos on social media come out from this action, and feeling like I had missed something huge, and feeling so incredibly inspired because I saw myself in those people so clearly. They were people my age, people younger, people a little older, feeling so scared in the same way that I was about climate change, and knowing that we had 12 years to really get important action on climate, and knowing that this was our chance, right? That we need to start as soon as possible, and that we had a chance now with this new Congress, and that it needed to happen now. And I also realized, like, wow, I guess we're allowed to criticize Democrats if we're not like happy with their leadership. I hadn't really realized that, and that I was allowed as a young person to ask for more, to accept greatness, to accept boldness from my elected officials, and that was something that I should be doing. And so I knew I wanted to be involved. I felt so called to be joining these young people, and I felt so joyful that I had I felt like I had a path forward in this advocacy. So I grabbed my friends and to the next meeting that Sunrise DC was having, and we found the meeting, and the room was packed beyond what they had expected because of the success of that action. And I ended up going to office visits the next day after that meeting on Capitol Hill with other people to start demanding climate action from the newly elected Democrats and from the Democrats. And honestly, it feels like the rest is history. I just honestly kept showing up to Sunrise DC meetings and to actions. And the more you show up, the more people give you things to do. And all of a sudden, I was acting as a police liaison at huge actions. And I was running Sunrise DC social media and helping plan events. And then a year and a half later, I guess I decided to found a hub of Sunrise at Georgetown at my own university. And in that time, I also spent some time pressuring Georgetown University to divest its endowment from fossil fuels. So that is, it honestly has felt like a whirlwind since that moment. But I wanted to share that story with you because I think that moment happens to everyone, that anyone that is involved in climate and environmental advocacy can probably tell you about the moment that they took that first step, and it was probably scary. I remember walking into that room, like holding hands with my friend, being nervous to go in there, and as soon as I did, like I felt so welcomed and so like in community with people who felt the same fear and the same urgency that I did, and we were all doing something about it. And it's been a truly incredible experience to be involved in Sunrise since then. I don't have much more time, but just to give you a broad sense about Sunrise as a movement. Sunrise is a movement of young people working to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. We're one of the organizations that's been at the forefront of the fight for a Green New Deal, which if you don't know much about yet, I encourage you to learn more about it. It's a really beautiful vision of how we can enact bold climate and economic policy to essentially secure a livable future for all of us and for future generations. Sunrise is a national movement, and it functions with a lot of national staff and support, but all of young people, basically no one over 30, which is also incredibly inspiring. And it also operates on the ground in local hubs. The Sunrise Boston hub is amazing, and there's also a lot of other smaller hubs in Massachusetts as well. And so, yeah, that's all I'll say. I hope you all learn more about Sunrise, and I hope you all feel inspired to take that step in your own advocacy journey. So, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy. So how can one not be inspired by stories like that? Our next speaker is not a student, but a grandmother and a mom and a retired family physician. Marty Nathan lives with her husband, Elliot, in Northampton, Massachusetts. She is a longtime activist for racial and economic justice and for peace. She writes regularly about climate justice for the Daily Hampshire Gazette and is the founder of the Markham Nathan Fund for Social Justice and the Cliniquita Fund for Immigrant Health. She is also a founding member of Climate Action Now and the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition. Marty brings a broad range of interests and experience to our series, and tonight she'll be sharing the story of the coalition, how it embodies the connections of climate justice with social and racial justice, and what led to its recent success in fighting the biomass plant in Springfield, Massachusetts. Please welcome Marty Nathan.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you, all of you, for your kind invitation to join you and share our truths about the climate emergency. The science is really clear. Our moral and survival marching orders are that we must cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2030. Further, in the process, in order to transform our society into one that is livable for all our people, not just a few, and build the mass movement necessary to do that, we must address the deep social and economic inequities of class, race, and gender that undergird it. We must reject the creation of sacrifice zones populated by poor people, generally people of color with little power, who are made to suffer unbreathable air and undrinkable water on toxic soil so that corporations can continue to profit in an extractive and emitting economy. We must also be partial to ensuring that the benefits of the necessary transition, jobs, investments, contracts, and decision-making are preferentially placed in the hands of those same communities and peoples. Otherwise, we cannot achieve our ends, and any victories we score will be hollow based on continuing suffering. We call this concept climate justice. This is not a small task. There are means to do it, though. Federal legislation and policy like those that Lucy talked about, based on the Green New Deal, that will take us forward in that quest. I urge us to devote as much of our energy as possible to supporting transformative change on the national level, demanding that it be as powerful, as exhaustive, and as expensive, yes, as it needs to be. Study after study has shown that no expense can compare to what we will lose with our road of business as usual. We cannot, in particular, in this moment, allow the Biden administration to fail in its mandate to adopt comprehensive emissions reductions now. Our planet cannot compromise, and the most effective means of stopping global warming is national and international action. There is so much work to do as well on the state level, where a decent and just climate change bill was just passed last year. Our fight must be for funding and implementation of that bill yesterday, if not before, without sidestepping or pretense. But I encourage all of us to dig into the battles in our own backyard, to eliminate existing pollution sources, prevent the construction of any new polluting infrastructure, transform energy use from the burning of fossil fuels to reliance on conservation and true renewables, and preserve and expand our forests and protect our soils as the carbon repositories that nature intended. As you do all of this, I'm afraid you will learn that you cannot make the necessary changes without confronting the ever shape-shifting demon of greenwashing for profit. And I guarantee you that you will also realize that you're up against the economic system itself. Let's go to a couple of examples. The first one, most of the time, will be spent on the Springfield biomass plant. Originally proposed by Palmer Quotes Renewable Energy in 2008, it was a 35 megawatt, $150 million wood burning electric power plant to be sited in a low-income East Springfield neighborhood, already deemed an environmental justice community. It would spew more than 200 tons of harmful air pollutants each year, including 33 tons of fine particulate matter, which has been linked to the increased risk of dying from COVID-19, among other things. Springfield had already been designated 2 years in a row as the asthma capital of the country. 1 in 5 children and adults have asthma. This was an act of climate injustice. Springfield residents, led by Michael Ann Busey, the late Michael Ann of Arise for Social Justice, fought it hard in the streets, in the city council, in the courts, and in the legislature, where in fact they won the elimination of biomass as a renewable energy source, or under the RPS. And as of 2019, amazingly enough, this David seemed to have defeated Goliath, and the Palmer plant looked dead. It just wasn't profitable without ratepayer incentives mandated by the state. We all heaved a tremendous sigh of relief. But then the zombie Goliath arose because the state revived those subsidies. In 2019, Governor Baker proposed amending the RPS to put biomass back in the mix to qualify with wind and solar. There ensued a massive backlash by residents who packed the Springfield hearing about the proposal. But despite the outrage, sneakily, at the very end of the year, 2020, Baker's DOER ignored climate science and public health and said that inefficient biomass would be counted as renewable. Then came the summer of 2020. Actually, we're backtracking 6 months. When the House climate bill made municipal light plants like Holyoke subject to regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. Great, wonderful, finally. But included biomass as, quotes, non-carbon emitting, it created another lucrative market for biomass. These official actions illustrate a particular type of greenwashing for profit. Each of these moves by authorities ignored or contorted the science and reality. The state's own research had shown that inefficient biomass burning releases more greenhouse gases per unit of electricity produced than the burning of coal, our dirtiest fossil fuel. And though trees can indeed be replanted, seedlings only reach the carbon storing capacity of the burned ones that they replace after decades to a century. Remember the marching orders? Cut emissions 50% by 2030. Does not compute. The administration and legislators influenced by the wealthy biomass and forestry industry were basing law and policy on lies. Springfield fought and fought again. Grassroots organizations allied with the Springfield Climate Justice Coalition organized thousands who called, emailed, protested in the streets, and signed letters and petitions to the legislators negotiating the final climate bill. The city council, led by the wondrous Jesse Letterman, unanimously passed a resolution opposing biomass, and we won, pretty much. In the final bill, biomass won't be a, quotes, non-carbon emitting source for 5 years. Put your heads to that. That dealt with the legislature, though. But those same thousands then had to pivot to demand a rejection of the governors granting millions in incentives to biomass like Palmer. And we won again through incredibly hard work and unity. Well, we won pretty much. The final proposal states that only old biomass plants can receive RPS incentives, and no plants can be built near an environmental justice zone. That eliminated Palmer as a threat. It was a massive win in a battle for science and public health on the one hand, against pollution, money, and lies for profit. And those are the battle lines as drawn today everywhere in the climate emergency. That paradigm, science and public health versus money, pollution, and lies, has been repeated on many fronts in our quest for a livable world for decades now. Exxon had done the necessary research in the 1970s, before Lucy was born, long before, that proved that their products would heat the world to intolerable levels. Yet they covered it up and created and funded an industry out of climate change denial. But we in Western Mass are now back in Springfield. We are facing another battle there to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure development at a moment we humans must invest all of our resources in the just conservation and renewables transition. Eversource Energy, who bought out Columbia Gas after the disastrous explosions in the Merrimack Valley, is aggressively pursuing what they call a reliability plan, building new fossil fuel pipelines north into the Connecticut River Valley. We won on one side of the Connecticut, preventing the building of a pipeline to Holyoke, but we are left with a struggle in Longmeadow and Springfield. We face a 16-inch, 200 pounds per square inch, which is high pressure monster that's proposed to carry fossil gas from a new metering station in Longmeadow to downtown Springfield. More gas to be burned, to leak, and potentially to explode in highly populated neighborhoods, with no evidence that more gas is needed. Eversource has treated their own campaign with deception and greenwashing, saying that they are becoming green, meaning that they move the gas using renewable energy. They are not getting rid of their product, which is the source of the problem. Leaked documents have shown that in their boardrooms, they are talking about natural gas fighting a losing battle, and they must fight it to the bitter end. We will stand against that pipeline, and we ask you to join us, but also to engage in all the struggles like this across the state. I hope that the church takes up the federal, state, and local challenges of our times in the spirit of proclaiming an active role in the climate emergency. There's so much to do and so much community to be had in the doing. I look forward to making good trouble with you.
Thank you very much, Marty. That is truly an inspiring story of persistence as well as mixed success. And you mentioned transformative change as inevitable. I think it could go either way, into the chaos and horror of extreme weather and high temperatures, or into a better future. And I am so happy to invite Fred Small with us today, because he is going to lead us into one path towards that better future. Fred is a Unitarian Universalist pastor, a singer-songwriter, and a former lawyer. But now he is the director of Faith and Action for Massachusetts Interfaith Power Light. I will let him describe it, but it is a way for all of us to be involved, to follow the call of Lucy and Marty and all those people at the front edge of this climate emergency. Please welcome Fred now.
Thank you, Sue. It's a great honor for me to follow such powerful activists, and I thank you, Sue, Lucy, and Marty, for your leadership. A few years back, I was talking with a colleague at a gathering of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association, a brilliant and charismatic young pastor of a thriving suburban congregation, really a rising star in our movement. Knowing my interest in the environment, she told me of everything green her church had accomplished: the brand new boiler, the highly efficient lighting, even solar panels on their roof. "We don't know what to do next," she exclaimed. I wasn't sure if she was expressing satisfaction in a job well done or a plea for help, maybe both. While I was thrilled by her dedication and enthusiasm, I was alarmed and discouraged that my colleague had, in fact, no idea what to do next. Because I knew of a half dozen crucial environmental and climate justice bills that were at that moment dying, a slow, agonizing death on Beacon Hill for lack of public support. And if this extraordinarily gifted minister of a liberal, environmentally minded, Unitarian Universalist congregation couldn't even imagine the possibility of encouraging her congregation to contact their legislators about these bills, there was something terribly wrong. For more than 2 decades, the Interfaith Power and Light movement, which many of you know began as Episcopal Power and Light, has helped congregations become better earth stewards, shrinking the carbon footprint of houses of worship and bringing solar panels to their rooftops. Personal responsibility is important. Congregational responsibility is important. If we're going to talk the talk, we must walk the walk. But greening our congregations, however vital, does not adequately confront the climate crisis, nor does it address the systemic injustices that pervade and sustain it that Marty was citing. So personal responsibility, congregational responsibility, that's a virtue. It's not a strategy. So I was shocked but not surprised to learn recently that the term carbon footprint, which I've used for decades, was coined by the ad agency Ogilvy and Mather on behalf of BP, British Petroleum. Because if the fossil fuel industry can convince us that climate change is all our fault and all our responsibility, they can continue destroying the planet without any pesky meddling by democracy. People of faith care deeply about creation and environmental justice. We have a unique moral voice to contribute to the public square. We must organize and advocate public policies to advance clean energy, reduce carbon pollution, and end decades of environmental racism and inequity. Now, a lot of white middle-class people like me seem to feel that change happens when reasonable arguments persuade reasonable decision makers to support reasonable policies. But as the previous speakers know all too well and have talked about, that's not the way it happens. History demonstrates that this reasonable assumption is an unreasonable illusion. If there is no struggle, said Frederick Douglass in 1857, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. This struggle may be a moral one, Douglass said, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand, said Frederick Douglass. It never did, and it never will. So this year, in cooperation with religious and secular environmental groups across the Commonwealth, Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light is launching the Faith in Action campaign to mobilize faith-based activists to hold our legislators and other decision makers accountable on climate and environmental justice. Grounded in their home congregations, Faith in Action teams will reach across boundaries of faith tradition and denomination in unified strategic campaigns for key policy goals. They'll build relationships. Sue was talking about the importance of relationships. They'll build relationships with other people of faith who feel called to action, and they'll build relationships with their legislators, their staff, and other decision makers. Mass IPL will offer training, guidance, and support to the Faith in Action teams, giving priority to those in legislative districts where religious environmental activism is likely to have the greatest impact. The Faith in Action campaign will serve as a bridge between the passion of people of faith who care passionately about creation and environmental justice and the political process that wields so much power over them. You can find out more about our work at massipl.org. That's massipl.org. And if you go there and click on the Mobilize tab, you scroll down to the Faith in Action campaign interest form, and you can sign up right there to learn how to get involved. I want to tell you about one other opportunity to make a difference that has already been mentioned earlier, and that's the Stop Line 3 campaign. 5 years ago, some of us here tonight answered the urgent invitation of Lakota Chief Arvo Looking Horse to join faith leaders from across North America at Standing Rock to support Indigenous resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline, gathering by the hundreds around the sacred fire at Ocheti Shakowin Camp. We prayed, we sang, we listened, and we bore witness to the wisdom of Mother Earth. For me, it was a life-changing experience. Now we are called again by Indigenous leaders to join a multi-faith delegation to the Treaty People Gathering, June 5 through 8, just 10 days from now in northern Minnesota. There will be an opportunity for nonviolent civil disobedience, but whether or not you choose to risk arrest, your presence will make a difference. The Treaty People Gathering has been endorsed by the National Interfaith Power and Light organization, and you'll find links to it in the chat, including information on how to get there and where to stay. When I was at Standing Rock, I was privileged to meet Lakota activist Chase Iron Eyes. We are running waters, Chase says. We are running waters, seeking a way, cutting fresh courses when spring swells us with power. We move mountains and break banks, creating. May we cut fresh courses. May we swell with power. May we move mountains and break banks until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Fred. Anybody ready to sign up? I just put the links in the chat. And one thing that was helpful to scared, cowardly people like me is that there's a way that we can support them without going to Minnesota. Even though I am from Minnesota and I really would like to go, it's not an option, but we can be supporters officially as well. So please do look at those links in your leisure. And now it's time for us to hear from you. We're going to have a breakout session. It's going to last about 12 minutes or so. And we're going to be in smaller groups of 3 to 4 people. We'd like you to consider these things. First of all, introduce yourselves, name, town, briefly though, because the core of this is what you're thinking. How have you already done something to advocate for a cause publicly? Lisa gave us many examples in the beginning, and there have been powerful examples over the rest of this hour. So how have you done something like that? And more importantly, what has inspired you to do something more in the future? What excited your curiosity? What roused you? How did you hear God calling you this hour? So Jennifer's going to break us up into small groups, and then we'll come back for a really wonderful closing. Again, thank you so much, people.
Here. Welcome back, everybody. I think we're almost here. Well, I hope you feel fed and inspired by tonight's presentations and conversation. And if you have identified your next step in advocating for climate justice, I invite you to drop a note in the chat and let us know what your next step is going to be. I'm also curious if there is any support that you need to carry it out. If there's any training you would like or any further information you'd like, we'd be very glad to know that too as we look ahead to next steps after these webinars are complete. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight and for being part of these historic conversations between dioceses and among friends beyond the Episcopal Church. You probably know a recording of all the 4 webinars will soon be posted on the websites for the Diocese of Massachusetts and the Diocese of Western Massachusetts. And I hope you'll enjoy taking a look at them. We're going to be dropping some links into the chat. And I want to let you know that we will soon follow up on these conversations by sending all of you a short list of resources. We also plan to send out an evaluation of these webinars to tell us what worked well for you, and particularly what next information or conversation would be helpful to you. What next steps do you think our 2 dioceses should take as we address the climate emergency together? So I hope we will stay in touch because we are certainly in this together. So just taking a look at the chat. Thank you for some next steps that I see people are ready to take. You can go, there are links there for the Creation Care Justice Network, which is based in the Diocese of Massachusetts. Wonderful way to get involved. I especially invite my friends and allies in the Diocese of Western Massachusetts to join that network as we organize ourselves together and mobilize together. Invite you to sign up for my Creation Care Network e-newsletter. Take a look at a climate advocacy video that I created. So, as we wrap up tonight, I'd like to invite us into a moment of prayer. And as we be sure I'm not missing any key thing in the chat here. Oh, some wonderful next steps people are willing to take. Thank you. Thank you, friends. All right, let's wrap it up for tonight. I invite us to stand in body or spirit as we pull the evening together. So we've come together tonight in the presence of the Holy Spirit, and now we are sent out to release that Spirit in the world. Here in the Diocese of Western Massachusetts, my title is Missioner for Creation Care. But actually, I hold that title on everybody's behalf. I think every one of us is called to be a missioner for creation care. So I'd like to invite us into a simple commissioning. And when it's over, you are invited, if you like, to linger for a little bit and to listen to some quiet music that is based on a Celtic prayer. So before the music begins, I invite us to become commissioned. So I invite you to take a look at your hands. What wonderful hands. There's so much that we can do with our hands, and let's hold them out so everybody can see them. And I'd like to offer a blessing of our hands using some words from a collection called Earth Prayers. Gracious God, blessed be the works of our hands. Blessed be these hands that have touched life. Blessed be these hands that have nurtured creativity. Blessed be these hands that have held pain, that have embraced with passion. Bless these hands that have tended gardens and planted new seeds. Bless these hands that have closed in fists in anger. Bless these hands that have harvested ripe fields and that have maybe become knotty with age and that are wrinkled and scarred from doing justice. Bless be these hands that have reached out and been received. And blessed be these hands that hold the promise of the future. So I invite you to take a finger and to, if you like, make a sign of the cross on each of your palms, or if you would like to just to make a smudge mark on each of your palms, I will say a commissioning prayer. May God bless you as a healer of the earth. And may the Holy Spirit descend upon you and upon us, rise up from below us, circle around us, and come from within us. May you, may I, may all of us be blessed as healers of the earth. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Amen.
If you like, I invite you to sit and we'll have some quiet music.
So deep peace to you all. Thank you, and blessings. We will be in touch. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer. This was good.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing with us. Bye all. Good night.
Right.